My daughter deserved better. She was 7 years old, gap-toothed and loud and absolutely fearless. The kind of kid who climbed every tree in the yard and named every stray cat in the neighborhood. Her name was Abigail, Abby, and she called me Dad like it was the most natural thing in the world, because for 6 years it was. I was a foreman at a warehouse outside Columbus. 12-hour shifts, steel-toed boots, a thermos of bad coffee. My son-in-law handed me of the mere preaching hours the first time my granddaughter after she was the arrangement. I trusted it completely. I trusted her completely. I don't know when I stopped paying attention. That's the thing I keep coming back to, the thing that lives in my chest like a stone I can't cough up. I don't know the exact day I stopped noticing the details. Maybe it was the overtime. Maybe it was the way exhaustion becomes its own kind of blindfold when you wear it long enough. The morning everything changed. I wasn't supposed to be home. I'd woken up at 3 a.m. with my stomach turning inside out, some kind of stomach bug, violent and fast. Called my supervisor from the bathroom floor, told him I wasn't coming in. Joanna was already awake when I stumbled back to bed. She looked at me in a way I couldn't name at the time. Not worried. Exactly. More like she was calculating something. She said I should sleep in the guest room so she didn't catch it. Thoughtful, I told myself. Considerate. I slept until noon. When I woke up, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Joanna's car was in the driveway, so she was home. Abby didn't have school. It was a teacher workday, a Friday. I figured they were out back, or maybe Abby was watching something in the living room with the volume low. I went to the kitchen for water. The house felt still in a way that made the hair on my arms stand up, though I couldn't have explained why. I chalked it up to being sick. Fever makes everything feel wrong. Then I heard it. A sound from the hallway. Soft, rhythmic, not quite a knock. More like something being dragged slowly across a surface. 3 slow scrapes, a pause, 3 more, coming from inside the wall behind the coat closet. I stood there with my glass of water and I listened. Mice, I thought. Old house, October. Mice come in when it gets cold. I'd dealt with them before. But then I heard something else. A voice. Not words, not at first. Just a sound that was unmistakably human. Thin and high and exhausted. Like someone had been crying for a very long time and had run out of the energy to cry properly anymore. "Hello," I said. I felt ridiculous saying it to a wall. The sound stopped. I stood there for a long moment. Then I heard it again, quieter, almost like it didn't want to be heard. A small voice. Trying. I went to find Joanna. She was in the bedroom, folding laundry. She looked up when I came in. And she smiled at me. The regular smile, the one I knew. And before I could say anything she said, "How are you feeling? You should be resting." I told her about the sound. I watched her face while I did. Something passed through her eyes so quickly I almost missed it. Not surprise. Something older and more practiced than surprise. Then she shook her head and said, "Babe, it's the pipes. This house is 40 years old. The pipes knock all the time, you know that." She went back to folding. "Go rest. You're sick, your brain is doing things." I almost believed her. I have thought about that moment so many times since then. How close I came to walking back to the guest room and lying down and sleeping through the rest of the day. How near I came to just accepting the explanation because it was easier. Because I was tired and sick, and because I had spent 10 years trusting this woman with my whole life. I went back to the hallway. I pressed my hand flat against the wall beside the coat closet. The drywall was cool under my palm. I closed my eyes and I listened with my whole body. And then, faint as a thread, "Daddy." The world tilted. I don't remember making the decision. I remember being in the garage, and then I had the utility knife in one hand and a hammer in the other. And I was standing in front of that section of wall, and my hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the handle. "Abby," I said. My voice came out strange, flattened. "Abby, is that you?" A pause that lasted 10 years. Daddy. Clearer now. Right on the other side of the drywall. Daddy. I can't get out. I put the blade of the utility knife against the seam where the drywall met the baseboard, and I ran it upward, and then I swung the hammer, and I didn't stop swinging until there was a hole the size of my torso in the wall, and the dust was still falling, and my daughter was looking back at me through the gap. She was sitting on the subfloor inside the wall cavity, her knees pulled up to her chest, her wrists bound in front of her with a zip tie. She had a strip of duct tape over her mouth. She'd gotten one corner of it loose. That was the only reason I could hear her at all. I got her out. I don't know how. My hands were shaking and I was crying, and she was crying, and the dust from the drywall was everywhere, and I kept saying her name and she kept saying Daddy, and I got her out, and I held her and I sat down right there on the hallway floor with my daughter in my arms, and I couldn't move. She was cold. She was so cold. She'd been in there for hours. When she stopped shaking enough to speak, she said, "Is Aunt Renata gone?" I didn't understand the question. Renata was Joanna's younger sister. She lived 40 minutes away in Worthington. She came over for dinners sometimes, holidays. She'd always been warm with Abby. I had liked her. "What does Aunt Renata have to do with this?" I said. Abby looked up at me. Her eyes were enormous. "She was here when Mama put me in there," she said. "She said I had to learn to be quiet." I set Abby on the couch with every blanket in the house, and I gave her water and crackers, and I called 911. Then I went to find my wife. Joanna was standing in the kitchen doorway when I came around the corner. She'd heard everything. Clearly. She had that look again, the calculating one. Except now there was nothing underneath it pretending to be love. She looked at me like she was deciding something. I said, "Why?" Just that one word. I couldn't find any others. She said she needed to learn. I asked her what that meant. She said Abby had thrown a tantrum that morning and broken a lamp, and that she had a method, a system, that her mother had used on her and Renata, that it worked, that children needed to understand real consequences. I stopped listening. Not because I couldn't hear her, because there was a sound coming from somewhere beneath my feet, below the kitchen, in the crawl space. I looked down at the floor. My wife stopped talking. The silence between us was enormous. "Who else is down there?" I said. I said it like a statement, because some part of me already knew it wasn't going to be a question with a good answer. The color left her face. I found the crawl space access panel in the utility closet. It was a standard panel, 16 by 24 inches, plywood painted to match the baseboard. I had installed it myself 8 years ago when I'd had the HVAC serviced. I knew exactly what was under there: vapor barrier, insulation, ductwork, dirt. The panel was warm. I don't know why I noticed that. I don't know what it means, physically, why it was warmer than it should have been. But my hand went flat against it and the panel was warm and my stomach dropped through the floor. I opened it. The smell came first, something heavy and wrong that sat in the back of your throat. I pulled out my phone and turned the flashlight on, and I shone it into the crawl space. In the far corner, against the foundation wall, there were 3 shapes wrapped in what looked like moving blankets, zip-tied at both ends. I shouted something. I don't know what. I heard Joanna's footsteps behind me going toward the back door, and I let her go because my legs wouldn't work, and my brain had stopped being able to do more than one thing at a time. I called 911 again. The same dispatcher picked up. She recognized my voice. I told her what I'd found. She told me not to go into the crawl space and to get outside, and I sat on the front porch steps with my daughter in my lap, and I waited. The detective who handled the case was named Birch, Detective Warren Birch, a tall, quiet man from the county sheriff's office, who spoke slowly and looked at you like he was memorizing your face. He told me, days later, when the official interviews were done and the formal language was finished, what they had found. 3 victims. 2 were young children, a boy, approximately 9 or 10 years old, and a girl who appeared to be younger, perhaps 6 or 7. The third was a woman in her late 20s. They had been there for varying lengths of time. The woman, they believed, had been there the longest, perhaps as long as 2 years, based on preliminary forensic analysis. The children, more recently, none of them had identification. Detective Birch told me something else. He said that neighbors had reported hearing sounds from my property on several occasions over the past year. Faint sounds at night, something that might have been a child crying. One neighbor had mentioned it in passing to Joanna herself. Joanna had told her it was the television. I had been at work. I had always been at work. The investigation expanded quickly. Renata was arrested at a rest stop on I-71 the evening of the first day she'd been trying to reach the Kentucky border. In her car, they found notebooks. Detailed, organized notebooks written in a careful hand. My wife's handwriting, mostly, with Renata's notes in the margins. I won't describe what was in them. Detective Birch described them to me in the most clinical language he could manage, and I still had nightmares about that conversation for a year. What I can tell you is that the two women had been doing this together for a long time. Longer than my marriage. The woman in her late 20s. They eventually identified her through dental records, had disappeared from a neighborhood in Cleveland nearly 2 years before the day I broke open that wall. The children were identified through a national database. There were families somewhere who finally got answers, though not the ones they had been hoping for. The question I couldn't stop asking in those first weeks was how. How had I lived in that house and not known? How had I eaten dinner at that table and slept in that bed and watched Joanna tuck Abby in at night and not seen what was underneath it? The therapist I saw, a woman named Dr. Flanders who specialized in trauma, told me that what I was feeling was one of the most common responses to this kind of discovery. She said that people who live with someone dangerous often describe the same thing afterward, that there were signs, small ones, that they had explained away one by one until the explanation became the only thing they could see. She asked me if there had been signs. I thought about it for a long time before I answered. Yes, there were the nights Joanna stayed up late after I'd gone to bed, and I'd assumed she was watching TV. There were the weeks the utility bills spiked in a way that hadn't made sense. I'd assumed it was the water heater acting up. There were the mornings Abby seemed withdrawn, quieter than usual. And I'd asked Joanna if everything was okay, and Joanna had said she was just tired, just going through a phase. There was a night, maybe 8 months before everything broke open, when I came home late from a double shift and thought I heard something in the kitchen. I'd gone downstairs and found Joanna standing very still in the dark by the utility closet, and I'd said, "What are you doing?" And she'd said, "I thought I heard the water heater again," and I'd gone back to bed. I think about that night a lot. Joanna was convicted on multiple counts 2 years after her arrest. Renata pleaded guilty in exchange for testimony. Both of them are currently in the Ohio correctional system and will be there for the rest of their lives. I sold the house the week after I was legally permitted to. I couldn't walk through it anymore without hearing that sound. 3 slow scrapes, a pause, 3 more. I sold it for less than it was worth, and I didn't care. Abby and I live in a different city now. Different school, different house, different everything. She's 9. She's in therapy. She has nightmares sometimes, but she also has a best friend named Zoe, and she joined a soccer team this fall, and she scored her first goal 3 weeks ago, and she screamed so loud the other parents laughed. She asked me once, about a year ago, if I knew. She asked it simply, directly, the way kids ask things when they haven't yet learned to be afraid of the answer. I told her the truth. I said no, I didn't know, and I am sorrier than I have words for that I didn't figure it out sooner. She was quiet for a minute. Then she put her head against my arm and said, "But you heard me." "Yeah, baby. I heard you. I don't tell this story because it ends well. It doesn't, fully. 3 people didn't come home. A child I loved was put in a wall by someone who was supposed to protect her. I shared a bed for a decade with a person I apparently did not know at all. I tell it because of that neighbor, the one who heard something and mentioned it in passing and then let it go. I tell it because of every moment I explain something away instead of asking the next question. I tell it because the sounds that don't make sense are usually worth one more minute of your attention. Children can't always tell you what's happening to them. Sometimes they can only scratch at the wall, listen for it. I think about the neighbor a lot, the one who heard something coming from my yard at night. A sound she couldn't quite place, something that might have been a child, and mentioned it once to my wife and then let it go. She wasn't a bad person. She was just a person who decided the explanation she'd been given was probably good enough and moved on with her day. I understand that impulse completely, because I lived inside it for years. What I've come to understand, slowly and not without a lot of pain, is that what happened in that house wasn't only the result of two evil women doing evil things. It was also the result of 100 small moments where someone, me, a neighbor, a relative, anyone, chose the comfortable answer over the true one. Evil like that doesn't only survive because of the people committing it. It survives because the people around it learn, gradually, to stop asking the next question. I was not a bad father. I want to be able to say that and mean it. But I was a distracted one, and distraction has consequences that don't care about your intentions. There's something I've been turning over since those first weeks in therapy. Something Dr. Flanders said that I resisted at the time because it felt too clean. She said that the capacity to face an unbearable truth, really face it, not flinch away, not reach for the easier story, is a skill. It's something you either build deliberately or you don't build at all. I hadn't built it. I'd built the opposite. A very efficient system for smoothing things over, for keeping the peace, for trusting the people I loved, because trusting them was easier than examining them. Abby has it, though. She was 7 years old, cold and scared and alone in the dark, and she didn't stop trying to make a sound. She scratched. She worked at that tape with her face against her knees until one corner came loose. She didn't give up when the sound she made wasn't enough. She tried again, smaller, more patient, and she kept trying until someone heard her. That's not something you teach a child in a classroom. That's something that lives in them if you're lucky, and your only job as a parent is not to knock it out of them before they need it. I think about what I want her to carry forward from this, and it's not the horror of it. She'll carry that whether she wants to or not. What I want her to keep is what she already had in that wall, the refusal to stop. The understanding that a situation being terrible does not mean a situation is permanent. She held on to that at 7 years old in the dark. My job now is to hold on to it with her, out in the open, in the regular daylight of an ordinary life. What I know now that I didn't know before is that love without honesty is just comfort. It feels like safety, but it isn't. The most important thing I can do for my daughter, more important than any material thing, more important than the good school or the safe neighborhood or the new house, is to be the kind of person who hears something that doesn't make sense and asks one more question. To model what it looks like to choose the true thing over the easy thing, even when the easy thing is right there. Joanna and Renata made their choices over years and decades, in small increments, each one a little worse than the last. That's how it works. No one wakes up one morning and decides to become the person they became. They practice without realizing they're practicing until the thing they've been building is finished. The same is true in the other direction. Abby scored a goal last month. She screamed so loud the whole field turned to look. I stood on the sideline and I clapped until my hands hurt, and I thought, this is what the other direction looks like.